We're now back in to introduce Mark 14 and why Mark doesn't use EUTHUS or Angus or Angidzo. Highlighted in blue in the center of the screen is a comparison of what we just saw in Mark 13 compared to Luke 21, which is the parallel passage. On the left-hand side is the Matthew parallel passage. And notice how Luke, I will be covering this in more detail in the Synoptics, which will be at least a year and a half from now before I get that far. But in the Synoptics, I will be covering how Luke wraps around Matthew, and you can sort of see it right now. Because Matthew doesn't engage in the additional information that Christ actually said, but Luke records. As has been shown already in the Synoptics videos that are out, Luke wraps around Matthew by elaborating on things that Matthew treats in summary fashion. And then Mark wraps around them both. And what we just saw in covering Mark 13 is that Mark was almost exclusively tracking to Matthew. But not exclusively. I said almost. In the center blue, if you compare that to the right-hand blue, you'll notice that Mark suddenly interposes Luke's text. This is a manner of incorporation by reference. Again, you sort of have to understand Greek writing style, and it's not just limited to the Greek writing style. It's common kind of in all languages. When you have a long swatch of text, especially in those days where they memorized everything, your first couple of words or your first sentence of a long swatch of text would serve as an index marker of where you were quoting. So you would state a section as if it were a title. And that would be usually the first 5 or 6 words of the text. The Jews did this all the time for reciting Bible. I find myself doing it also for the parts of the Bible I've been caused to memorize in Hebrew. It's really handy to do it that way. You just remember the first couple of words and the whole rest of the quote comes to mind. That's what Mark is doing here. He is making an interpretive quote of what's on the right-hand side of the screen in blue. Okay, and by doing that, it's called, even in today's legal profession, and this has always been a legal rule, it's called incorporation by reference. You take a key section in somebody else's document, and you pointedly word it so that it's very clear you are quoting that other section of the document, either directly verbatim or interpretatively. And everybody knows that they have to look in that other document to understand what you're talking about. Okay? It's an important legal technique. I use it every day because I have to deal with law every day. Alright, so it's really obvious. And the Jews will tell you that that's how you're supposed to do it also, because that's what they understood in their tradition. Okay, that's why the Mishnah is worded the way it is. That's why the Talmud is worded the way it is. Okay, they use swatches of text as like titles and to incorporate whole bunches of text into what they're saying. Now, Mark has been practically verbatim quoting Matthew. But with Luke, he's not doing a verbatim quote. He's doing an essence quote, an interpretative quote of the text on the right-hand side. Now that matters a great deal, because what Luke is doing, and this is what you end up seeing in Paul, if you know the meter, and if you don't know the meter, you miss this. What you see in Luke is that he is making a significant departure from what Matthew had said in Matthew 24. Okay? See, this is Matthew 24. Same start. Alright? Not be torn down. Okay? Same thing here. Not be torn down. So, see, Luke is tracking to Matthew. What will happen when these things take place and then slightly different phrasing here. Luke is doing a summary quote. Okay, or it could be a second statement. He could be doing a direct quote too. You always have to allow for both, because there was a lot of repetition. The Lord said the same things over and over again. The pastor never tired of repeating that fact, because he liked to repeat. Yeah, and thanks to his repetition, I know Bible in my sleep. Okay? If I sound competent to you, it's because I was under a competent teacher. Okay? And if you get under that teacher, and maybe you should be under some other teacher, I'm not necessarily sure who should be under my teacher, but if you're under a good teacher, you will be a good student. That's assuming that you want to learn from the teacher. Okay? And there's no particular denomination that's better than another or worse than another. If the teacher is good and he's in the wrong denomination, God will graduate him out of that denomination later. Just ask God, who's your teacher. Okay, I'm under a good teacher. My teacher is dead. Okay, that's why I sound competent. That's the only reason I sound competent. 1 John 1:9, and being under a good teacher. And then the teacher, the Holy Spirit, uses a good teacher. There's nothing good about me. There's everything good about what God can do, and everything good about what he did to that teacher. Okay? So, I get a lot of compliments, and I hate them. There's nothing good about me. Don't compliment me. Compliment my teacher. And my teacher is the Holy Spirit. And if you like what you hear, in spite of my, kind of nasty disposition, it's a persona. It's not really me. All right? If you like what you hear, then fine. Use 1 John 1:9. Ask God for your right teacher, and you'll know more than I do. That's my earnest prayer for everybody. I wish everybody learned what I didn't learn. It took me 40 years to get here. I hope it takes you 5. Because I'm pretty stubborn, so it took me longer. All right? So, end of the age is said here. Luke omits that. It's real important because he's doing it on purpose. Same device that Matthew uses at the end of Matthew 2. Matthew reserved the name Nazareth to the end of Matthew 2 because he was building up to a climactic statement. Okay, because it means dedicated. That means the same thing as Hanukkah. It's a play on words. Okay? Dedicated to the job, Nazaret. Netzarim. Alright? Dedication of the temple, Hanukkah. Really funny. So, end of the age is the topic here. I just noticed that while reading. I need to kill myself. Instead, things that are about to take place, which is a paraphrase of ding, 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 ding. Luke doesn't mention end of the age. Why? Because Christ is already dead. His job is to explain church, the reversal of church. So he leaves that out on purpose. Okay, and then we go through the misleading clause right here. Okay, then we go through the misleading clause. All right, everything's fine, but look at here. Look, 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 look. See, remember, Luke didn't include that. What does Luke say? It does not follow what? What is that word? Do you remember that word? Aren't you sick of that word? EUTHUS. Oh, but that word's not in Mark. It's not in the parallel section of Mark. Mark's leaving it out. Huh. Immediately, next in sequence, upright, straight, no obstruction. Okay, but the key idea in EUTHUS, which is highlighted in blue on the right, translated immediately there, the key idea is that you haven't gotten to the destination yet. The whole idea of EUTHUS is to prepare or to create an obstruction-free path. Hopefully you got that from having to listen to, an hour and a half of usage in the Bible. But the other key idea there, yeah, it's immediate, but it's immediately what? After. Next. And that's the big mistake the scholars are making, is they are so aware that it means next in sequence. They're missing all that cultural baggage about upright and obstruction. And they focus on the fact that it's what? Next. Okay, but next is not now. You got that. Next is something that's not happening now. It's something that straight away is going to happen after now, if the road is clear. Does not follow immediately. The end does not follow immediately. But that is not yet the end. In other words, this is an elaborative quote. Christ did say it. Because that's different. This is the use of EUTHUS, keyword. It's not mentioned here in Matthew. So you would be appending, see? You would be saying, okay, he repeated. This is not an exact, this is an extra thing that he says. All right? It does not follow immediately. Okay, so then why isn't Mark using that term? Because he's not using Luke for that part of it. He's using Matthew. And Matthew doesn't use the word EUTHUS there. Matthew uses the term, but not there. Why? Because at the time Matthew comes out, it can't be any later than 40, I wouldn't even go farther than that really. The absolute latest it could be, and I don't even think you can even argue that anymore, the absolute latest it could be would be 44 AD. Because Paul's letters quote from Matthew. Romans quotes from Matthew and some of the earlier writings too. Okay? But I'd have to look at the Acts, because the Acts of the Apostles are written later, but it's talking about events that happened in 30 through 44 AD, and it's a question of whether Matthew's Gospel was quoted in Acts during those, repeating words that were said by people in those days. Maybe I can find something that'll help us hone down how early it was, but it couldn't have been any outside. At the outside, it was 44 AD. Okay, where is EUTHUS? Not there. Okay, it is saying it's not the end. It is saying that all this stuff precedes. Okay? But look at the text there in Matthew. Now look at the text, very different, in Luke. Nation rises against nation. He's tracking to Matthew. Earthquakes, plagues. Tracking to Matthew, a little more elaborative. Before these things, they will lay their hands on you. So you see how he's saying, here he's inserting, he's elaborating, clarifying. The Lord did say this at the time, but Matthew doesn't record it. This is what they're going to do. Opportunity, testimony, decide, prepare. I will give you utterance. Okay? You will be betrayed. He'll put, okay, right there. That's all extra. That's not in Matthew. That is what Mark is tapping into right here. You see that? Okay, and then there's more preamble. This is like before the tribulation. Again, we got what's being tracked. This is Mark tracking to Luke. Before all these things, this part. Okay? Now, again, there's a tracking back to Matthew here. Well, not there. Right here. he reverses the order. This is one of his characteristics, where he says, by your endurance you will gain your lives. Okay? Then he inserts the clause that is later said here. He's reversing it. Okay? When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize what? The desolation is near. You notice he's not talking about this. This is in addition. See, he's already done that. He's inserting. These are additional things the Lord said. See, this is the tribulation. But this is before. See? Her desolation is here. He's not talking tribulation. He's talking about the desolation of Jerusalem. So these are actually two related discourses. Okay, and look, that the things that are written must be fulfilled. Let me move this up a little bit. This whole section here, okay, that's inserted. Two tribulations. You get this, I hope. This is very different. Jerusalem's desolation. Those in Judea flee, in the city flee. It's not the same language. These are the days of vengeance. See, this is the upcoming destruction of the temple. He's drawing a parallel. This is not the same text. This is a parallel example. It doesn't deny this text. It's setting a parallel to that text. Christ talked twice on the same topic. Okay, look, until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That's talking about the 57 years, but now it's updated with church. See, Luke's whole purpose is to show the reversal to church. Okay? And then look, it's very different. Then they will see. Not we will see. Not this generation will see. The Son of Man coming in a cloud. They will see. They will faint. This will be tapped by John in Revelation 6. This, of course, is a precursor of Revelation 12. But see, this is the setting. This is post-church. This is the update. Post-church. Christ actually said all of this. He talked about it on more than one occasion. There are two like events. There are two tribulational sevens. He knew he was going to die 7 years early. So this is what has to happen so that first 7 can play. And this is the second 7. Okay? When he's saying this, the audience who got that, who actually heard it, also would have heard this. But Matthew is stressing this because it's his job to talk about the Jewish side. It's Luke's job to talk about how come it changed the church. You see that? And look at here. Look at the next change. All right? So you also, when you see these things happen, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. Okay? Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass until all things take place. Yes, but what things in this context of Luke? He's not talking about the abomination of desolation. The generation who witnessed okay, look. That. This is a different group. There will be. That's not current generation. There will be, then they will. Different group. Okay? And that different group is talking like to the far future. And we're going to see that down here too. Down here, see? Right here. I mean, you're going to have to study this more, but the point I'm trying to make is that there are two tribulational sevens, which you already can prove if you just properly accounted Daniel 9. That's how I learned of it. I didn't, scholars are dead wrong to use lunar years. Bible doesn't authorize that. You can't reach your birthday. Bible counts in birthdays. Birthdays have to be based on a solar year or you miss it. And that was when I first went on this journey, and that was 11 years ago. I was trying to reconcile Daniel 9. And that's how I learned about the two tribulational sevens. Okay, but here's textual tie to two tribulational sevens. Because if there are two of them, you would expect the text to be different, parallel but different, just like Daniel 11:35 and prior is talking about one event, Daniel 11:36 and after is talking about the tribulation. But they're parallel, but they're different events. Okay, well, here you are. Okay, now how is Mark tying into that? Alert. What I say to you, I say to all. To all. Everybody. Not just the people standing in front of him. This generation, when you see, recognize he's at the door. This generation is a generation that's now besieged. All right? What I say to you, the generation besieged, I say to everybody. See the distinction? The appointed time will still come. Okay? He's mostly tracking to Matthew there, but because he did this, all right, he's pointing you to this section of Luke. So you are seeing both parallels, both sevens, both events woven. Okay, so why doesn't he say more of Luke? Why does he go to this? Because Jerusalem's already besieged. He doesn't need to say this. It's already happened. Jerusalem's already besieged. So there's only one thing for them to do. Sit tight, understand, and believe. They're already in siege. When Luke's writing it, the temple was still standing. There was no siege. It began soon after he wrote. But the siege is going on when Mark writes. And like I said, I have to hone this down more. But it looks like the order was Paul dies, then Peter writes, Peter dies, then Jude gets it, and Jude dies. And then the book of Hebrews had to have been written apart from all that. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out who the author is. That would help. But until I can find keys, I mean, it references some things that you could argue it references some things in Peter and maybe in Jude, but it's more the tone than the actual words I have to look. But it doesn't reference Mark's gospel as far as I can tell. So it looks like Mark's gospel was last, and he was basically the courier for the other three. Okay? That's what it looks like. I might, I have to keep searching. But if that were true, let's pretend that's true, then he doesn't need to say what Luke is saying here. That's already been elaborated on in the book of Hebrews. What he needs to do is focus on get out of there Okay, because you don't know if it's going to be rapture. There's only going to be two issues applicable to people at the time they're getting Mark's gospel, just his part of it. Okay, A, what do we do if we're stuck? The answer is believe now, because that was the message of the book of Hebrews. The answer is believe now, have faith in God for deliverance. That was the message of Hebrews 10. All right? And the other thing is, well, maybe it's the rapture. That's it. Okay, so how is he going to communicate that? Right here. What is he focusing on the most? The theme of the rapture. He doesn't have to do this. This is already covered in Book of Hebrews. Book of Hebrews was written because the rapture was imminent. So he's going to pick up where the Book of Hebrews leaves off here, which argues for Mark being last. And he's sort of incorporating the whole idea of the Book of Hebrews right in there. I mean, he's literally, this is actually a quote from the Old Testament. Okay, but that's the end of Hebrews 10. And the Lord really did say that, and it's quoted. See, sometimes it's hard to know who's first because everybody's quoting everybody else. All right? But this is really the only issue that's left. It's either the rapture, okay, or just simply the destruction of the temple. If it's the destruction of the temple, then this is what's going to apply. All right? If it's the rapture, then this is what's going to apply. This whole issue. All right? Otherwise, he's already incorporated what Luke said just by this. That's all he has to do. And so he's done that first. And now second, okay, well, maybe it's the rapture. And if so, then if you don't believe, here you are sitting in Jerusalem, you're besieged, and you don't believe, okay, well, if the rapture occurs, then this text is going to be immediately important. And the thing that really strikes me about this, and I had to go look it up, because I usually don't have to, but this time I did, this phrase here, okay, it really kind of shocked me. All right. This is what kind of clued me into how to talk about this. Okay, see, this one says stars will fall. In the Greek, that's a simple future tense. But this is a periphrasis. Okay? I should just really show you this. This really was a shock. There's a lot of debate about all kinds of things, in Christendom and in language and doggone near everything else. Okay? But one of the things that they talk about is whether or not this is a valid thing. It's called future periphrasis. All right? How come? There we go. Well, NIV is usually okay, but it uses thought for thought translation more than okay. Here's the phrase in question. Right there versus right here. Okay? Periphrasis, the way they tell you in seminary and whatever. Periphrasis means you use a roundabout way of saying a thing. That's not really a good way to describe it. The purpose of periphrasis is to slow down and stress the thing that you're talking about. And, it's current fashion now in seminary to poo-poo the Atticisms and the Hebraisms and all kinds of other isms, Latinisms that are used in the Greek language of the Bible. But that's sloppy scholarship, okay? You say, well, it's Koine. Koine is the same. No, it isn't. First of all, there's no such thing as a pure language anyhow. Everybody mixes in elements of other people's language. And so to shallowly treat it that way, you're doing a disservice to the Word of God. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be so critical all the time, but I'm really sick of what I'm beginning to realize now is a huge continuing trend of sloppy scholarship. ever since the 1930s, after the 1930s. Until the 1930s, there was pretty good scholarship, but after the 1930s, it's really started to go into the trash dump. And I'm sick of it. Okay, we had a lot of valuable scholarship from 1880 to 1930 that is being thrown away now. And the current scholars are sloppy. It shows. Their ability to understand doctrine is really kind of sickening. And I don't want the current generation who has to go through seminary and hear all this garbage to not be aware that it's a serious decline in scholarship. Well, here's one of the examples. In classical Greek, you slowed down and did something like this in order to let your audience participate more in the action. It was a style of drama, and we even use it in English. How he was putting it into he was putting the coin into the piggy bank when, instead of he put the coin in the piggy bank when it happened. If you say he put the coin in the piggy bank, the brain is not able to tie as quickly to the action unless you slow it down. And then the person is more participatory. The person can participate more in what's going on. So that's one use of a periphrasis, where you slow down so the audience can participate in the action. That gives it more dramatic effect. That gives it more involvement. You can feel like you're there. Okay? So it's translated improperly. The stars will be falling. Okay? The stars will fall. That's Matthew. Okay? But there's another thing about this. Okay. As you can see, IME in the lower middle window, esonte, future, middle, indicative, middle. Okay? IME is not naturally a middle voice verb. Okay? It's an active verb. Okay? And that's why they call it deponent. It's passive in form but active in meaning. Okay? Falling is really reflexive in force. Okay, and most verbs of every language I've ever heard of that talk about falling, they have a reflexive form. So deponent, so-called deponent verb, can be reflexive too. In other words, it's something that's happening to you, but it's also your own action. Just like when you brush your teeth, that's reflexive. You're doing it to yourself. All right? Like I said, this is more dramatic to string it out. Plus, in Greek drama, participles are more dramatic. Okay, but the issue here has to do with, see, this is a present participle. But this is a future use of IME. So one of the things that's said about this kind of structure is that it's not really future tense. Okay? It's not really meant as future tense. It's present. It's in form, it's a future tense, but it's really meant to convey present tense. Okay, so think about that. Think about that. It says will be falling, and you can see that even if you think about it, because of the way it's structured, okay, even if it's future, it's a called aspect, it's the point of view. Even if it were something technically future, it's being presented to you as happening now. You got that? Whereas this here is being presented to you as happening in the future. Stars will fall. Well, Revelation 12 is a no-brainer, okay? But here, will be falling, it's depicted as currently happening. Got that? Currently. Yeah. And what is currently happening when Mark writes? Jerusalem is under siege. You see that? So that accounts for why. Okay? That accounts for why all he had to do is rope in our boy Luke by this phrase in Mark 13:11. But then he goes back to spending the bulk of his text, okay? The bulk of his text tracking to Matthew. Because it could be the rapture. You see that? It could be that the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. It could be that the church had matured in that generation since. You see that? So he's stressing, beware, be alert. That's why he ends it with be alert. It could be the rapture within 18 months. Now, it's not right to set dates, okay? But it's also not right to ignore the fact that the rapture can happen on any day. So if there is something that makes sense that it might happen now, it's also right to bring it up. Okay? That's not date setting. That's just reminding you that it can happen. And by the way, here's an event that's going to occur that would make it make sense if it did occur, if the rapture did occur now. Okay? That's not date setting. That's just a way to remind you, hi, see, this is plausible. It's plausible that the rapture happened now. Here's why it's plausible. Okay? It's just a way to remind you. And that's why Paul did what he did with the date setting. He wasn't date setting like, violating the command of Acts 1. He's saying if the rapture happened, this is what it would mean. If it happened in the year 66, it meant this. If it happened in the year 77, it meant that. And all that formed together a great doxological poem in Ephesians 1, 3 through 14. And at the same time gave you a way to chart yourself. Where would you be in church history? Okay, we're now in Mark 14. And it's kind of convenient that this is the Synoptic Tool in BibleWorks. Number 116 in the blue, highlighted in blue. If you were to just click on that, you would get, see how I'll do it. Okay, I just clicked on that, and what you see on screen is what results. It's a great tool for seeing parallel passages in the Gospels, which is really important, and unfortunately, because our Gospels are in the wrong order, all of our books in the Bible are in the wrong order for the most part. Because of that, we're all confused when we read the Gospels. But if you understand the order and you understand what the writers are doing, then a lot of that confusion gets cleared up. This is one of those passages where there is a lot of confusion about who said what, who did what, because we moderns are imposing on the Bible a rhetorical style it doesn't have. We are insisting that each one of these Gospels verbatimly say the same thing, as if they were three independent witnesses who are required to say the same thing. Okay, but witnessing doesn't work like that. When you say the gospel to somebody, you're not going to use the exact same words somebody else is going to use. But the gospel is believe in Christ and you're forever saved. If you say some version that communicates that idea, the person who believes what you say is going to get saved. You don't have to word it the same way I do. I don't have to word it the same way you do. The truth is still the same. But you might use a lot of words to do it, and I might use just a few, or vice versa. The same thing is true here. Okay, there are a lot of different ways to say the same thing, and Christ in fact repeated himself in a lot of different ways, saying the same thing. The Bible does that all the time. Every single book of the Bible is very repetitive. And the reason why is because it's like a serial novel. Parts of it were published, time and then time and then time and then time. And it's got to include all the themes in it, each book. But it doesn't ever say it the same way. Sometimes there are direct quotes. Sometimes there are interpretive quotes. Sometimes there are allusions and paraphrases. But it's still the same truth. Okay? Now, the other thing that's really special to Bible is that there are truths said in later books repeating the same story that adds something to what went before, that it is talking about the same time. And that's what's happening here. Matthew is first, Luke is second, and Mark is third. So Luke takes stuff in Matthew that's treated summarily and adds elaboration. Sometimes Luke just quotes Matthew and moves on. Mark, of course, we've already seen this many times now. Mark sometimes just quotes Matthew, or sometimes he quotes Luke, or it's a paraphrase or an incorporation by reference. And if he's saying that Christ said this thing, then he really did say it. But he said the same idea more than once. Okay? Maybe in the same event. It's very distinctive Hebraic style to say a thing one way and then say a thing another way. It's a distinctive feature of the Psalms that you have two statements that are very much like each other in a couplet. All the scholars know this. They're stating the same concept, the same idea, with different nuances being stressed. But they're different words too. So you have to evaluate it. You can't gloss over a Bible text. Too many people do that. So now we're going to see something here. This is a parallel passage that's talking about the final Passion Week. And of course the goal here is to show why EUTHUS is not being used by Mark until verse 43 of this chapter. Why? Remember what EUTHUS means. Straight, upright, no potholes in the road, no debris in the road, no obstacles. Okay, but what is Passion Week? The opposite of all that. Passion Week is about obstacles. Passion Week is about the week that he's going to die as their last chance to vote. Will they vote for him when he's arrested? That's their last 4 days. The voting period is going to end. Israel still could have voted during those 4 days. Satan was busy trying to get Christ killed before the 4 days were up so that he would not die on time. He ends up dying on the 1470th anniversary of the original Exodus to the day. And I spent a lot of time on that in my passplot.htm showing you the verses and everything so you could see it. That's 3 490s from the Exodus, just as foretold. Okay? So we're in that final week. So there is nothing about this final week that's EUTHUS at all. All right? Now, did Matthew maybe use the term? Did Luke maybe use the term? Well, we've seen what their uses are. Mark is not using the term. He's not using the term also because at the time he writes, Jerusalem is under siege. There are nothing but obstacles to a siege. There's no nextness. It's already happening. Okay? EUTHUS means immediately after something. There is no obstruction between event A and event B. There might be a time difference, but there's no obstruction. All right? There's nothing but obstruction going on at the time he writes. There's nothing but obstruction that goes on during Passover week because everything could have been different. That's the theme of Passion Week, is obstruction. The nextness was to be his death, but there was all kinds of opportunity to change that. People could have voted differently. Don't you think God could have delivered him? And maybe he dies on the cross later. But if people wanted to hear, if it wasn't the right time to die, if the message hadn't completely gotten out, or there was something else, then he wouldn't have died then. So it's all about obstruction. The nextness was still in doubt. It could have happened later. All right? So, what we want to do here is we need to really see what Mark is doing. Okay? Mark is obviously tracking to Matthew and obviously tracking to Luke. You'll notice how what he's saying, it's got 2 days away. Okay? That's taking here. He's being real surgical now. Very much surgical. Here's the 2 days. All right? So here's the 2 days. He's tracking to Matthew there. Okay? The chief priests and scribes were seeking how to seize him. Okay? The chief priests and scribes were seeking how they might seize him. Okay? He adds this. Well, he didn't add it. He's pulling that from Matthew. See how surgical this is? He's pulling that from Matthew. Okay? This is they plotted together to seize, but this is seeking how they might put him to death. So now, he's adding the word stealth. Okay? He's pulling that. See how surgical this is? He's taking the stealth from Matthew. Seeking how, he's taking from Luke. Plotted together. Seize. Seize. Put him to death. See how he's doing it? Here he quotes Matthew, and they end up doing the exact opposite of their intention. You see how he's doing this? All right? He doesn't mention this part. Okay? He leaves that out at the moment. What he goes to immediately, excuse the pun, is the perfume thing. And that's following Matthew. See? That's the objection. Matthew doesn't state that Judas said anything. It wasn't only Judas, for one thing. See? But some. He's not mentioning Judas. Okay? He leaves Judas off to the end down here. Because when he writes, everybody knew Judas was the guy. He wasn't the only one, though. Okay? The disciples were indignant. It wasn't just Judas. Okay? And our boy, Luke, leaves it out. So you see, he's getting real surgical now. Alright, so now we come back, we get done with the perfume thing. Yeah, there's more elaboration, but Mark's just summarizing. He's pointing you where he is at in tracking to Matthew. Okay? Now we got Judas. And see, Judas went to the chief priests. Judas went to the chief priest to betray him. Matthew provided more detail. Okay? The chief priests, and then he jumps to Judas. And summary. And their attitude. He doesn't quote. Matthew's already quoting. You see? They were glad when they heard this. They were glad and agreed to give him money. You see that? He's surgically tracking to Luke. See? And tracking to Luke. And tracking to Matthew. You see this? Okay, so you have now seen a pattern of what he's doing in Mark 14. He is selecting parts of Luke, and he's selecting parts of Matthew. Okay, so here's how you read whatever seems to be a contradiction. You read what Matthew says, like here. This is a good example, actually. And we'll move this up so we can make it parallel to Matthew. Okay, here's the first day. Here's the parallel in Luke. Now look at that. What Matthew says is, where do you want us to prepare? No mention of Peter or John. No mention of Jesus sending to them. Okay? So what you find out in Luke wrapping around Matthew is that it's the Lord who started it. The where question is as a result of the Lord summoning Peter and John and saying, go prepare the Passover. And they said to him, where? Matthew, see, that's inserted between this part of Matthew and here. See, they came to him and asked where. Yeah, they did come to him, but why did they come to him? They came to him because he sent for them. So this is not a contradiction. They did come to him, okay? And why? Because he sent for them. And what did they ask? Where do you want? Yeah, that's what they asked. But they asked it because he said this. You see that wraparound? Okay? Now Mark just takes looks at the Matthew side. This is his disciples, generic. He doesn't have to say who it was. Okay, Luke had already said who it was. So, Mark tags to Matthew there. And he incorporates the sent. See how surgical this is? He incorporates the sent of Luke there. And then, pitcher of water. Just follow him. See, look, keyword follow him. Follow him. He doesn't include the last half. That's a Greek style of discourse. You're just follow him. You're to understand that the rest of the sentence is what Luke was saying. Okay? Matthew, by contrast, just said that much. He didn't talk about a pitcher of water. You see? So, Mark is tracking to who? Luke here. And he's quoting him this far. He doesn't have to say the rest. Okay? And then he inserts this. And wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house. Okay? So he's still tracking to Luke. See that? Whereas Matthew, this was just summary. See how surgical that is? See how stupid it is to claim that Mark is the original gospel? How can he be the original gospel if he's quoting Luke and Matthew? How can he be the first? They got it bass-backwards. But if you don't believe the Bible, you get everything bass-backwards. All right? So, and I can't spend too much more time on this because it's already 16 minutes. People don't like it when I make long videos, but I try to do it so we can stay on topic all in one go. The way you want to read this then is you first read, hopefully I've shown you the pattern, okay? Yeah, that'll do. All right. So when you go to read this, you first read Matthew, and we'll see what Matthew says. Then you go to read the parallel passage in Luke, and this is really helpful if you have BibleWorks. Use the Synoptic Tool. I'll show you how, I can't show it to you now. I'll show it to you before I close the video. Okay? First read Matthew, then read Luke, and then knowing that Mark is going to incorporate both of them, then read Mark and follow very closely the changes he makes in the text so that you know when he's tracking Matthew and when he's tracking Luke. Because what Mark's going to do is synthesize the accounts. And that really matters because there's a lot of people who just can't think outside a paper bag. And when they read this, and then they read this because they're reading it in the wrong order, and then they read this, which is later on here, they get all confused. Now, what you can tell is that this part here is your key. They began to be grieved after he sought about the betrayal. They went to him one by one. So that means that Christ had to answer one by one each person. Okay? And as we find out, see, he who dips, they began to discuss, okay, whoa, here's the hand, all right? And we don't find out until John, to whom he said this. He said it to John. They all said it to him. But he eventually said it to everybody. You see that? He said to them. This is just saying he answered. It could have been to one or more people. Okay? The hand of the one betraying me is with mine on the table. Okay? He said to them. In other words, it wasn't only to John, but it was to John. Because John's the guy who's going to tell you, that he was the guy who asked. Okay, but he didn't only say it to John. You see, you can resolve what seem to be contradictions if you first read Matthew, you then read Luke, and since Mark is third, you read how he synthesizes the two, and then you read John. And see if that doesn't make more sense to you. So now to close this out, the best way to close it out is to show you how to do the Synoptics tool. Okay, here's BibleWorks. Here's Mark 14 on screen. There are, I don't know if you see, yeah, you can see the tooltips. All right. This one here, see where it looks like 3 light switches? It'll be maybe in a different position in BibleWorks 8, but that's still the same icon. And it says Open Synopsis Tool. You see where it says Open Synopsis Tool in the tooltips? When you click on it, this is what you get. And the place in the synopsis where it opens depends on where you are in BibleWorks basically. Like I'm at Mark 14, so if I click on Synopsis Tool, I'm going to get what passages are parallel to Mark 14. Okay, let's come back to this. I didn't know that they had it in the Synoptics Tool. In the Synoptics Tool, number 119 shows all 4 Gospels on screen instead of just the 3 as I'd shown you earlier. And what I did was highlight in blue the sections about dipping the bread, because that seems to cause people a lot of trouble. And I want you to notice that this obviously means that it happened more than once. Look at this. Okay. In Matthew, he who dipped his hand is the one. And then Judas asks, "It's not me, is it?" And when it says "you have said it," that's an idiom for yes. Okay? What it really means is you have testified correctly or you have answered correctly. All right? So the answer is yes. In other words, Judas was being, how do you want to call it? Pretending to be innocent. Okay? He was just mimicking what everybody else was already saying. Everybody went up to Jesus one by one and said, "Am I the one that's going to do it?" And so Judas followed suit, knowing that he was the one who was going to do it. Okay. All right. So that is one instance at the same meal. In other words, you have to think, you have to think logically. All right? We've seen enough Bible movies. We know that the table was low and you laid down at it. That's Roman style. That was also Greek style, a lot of styles. A lot of people had low tables then, because it's actually more comfortable to lie down to eat than it is to sit in a chair. Okay, the sitting in a chair eating thing is really annoying. All right, so they were reclining at table. That's an expression that we've all heard of in the gospel. Okay, when you're reclining at the table, there's a lot of movement. There's the passing of dishes, there's conversation, there's all kinds of things going on. So when you're talking with a bunch of people, there's a bunch of movement, a bunch of crosstalk, a bunch of everybody talking to each other, and he's just made an announcement that one of them is going to betray him. All right, so now they're talking to each other, they're still eating, they're moving food around, blah, blah, blah. And in those days, the bread you ate was, in order to keep it preserved, it was extremely dry. So you had to dip it in water in order to make it palatable, otherwise it would break in your mouth. All right, it was more like a cracker. All right, so bread was a staple. So when he says on the left, the one who dipped his hand in the bowl with me is the one who will betray me, that was one instance. Okay? And then Judas says, is it me? And he says, yes. Okay, everybody heard that. So those are two instances right there on the left in Matthew. Matthew 26, 23 through 25. Okay, then we have another instance. Okay, it's sort of a summary statement. Of course, this is the third gospel by Mark. Okay, it's one of the 12 who dips with me in the bowl. Okay, he's copying what Matthew said. All right, and he's copying that part, and you can tell that he's obviously tracking to Matthew. All right, so that one's pretty easy. That's a no-brainer. Okay, now we got a third instance. Luke's gospel, which is second, the hand of one betraying me is with mine on the table. His hand and my hand are both on the table at the same time. Okay, and then the same quote. All right, the hand. Well, everybody's moving around. It's not the one dipping in the bowl at this moment. Judas's hand and his hand were on the table at the same time. Different point in the same conversation about the same topic. So, this was a prolonged topic, and obviously it would be. 12 different people all hearing that they might be the betrayer. Okay? And at the very time that Judas is doing this, these are how these other people are betraying Christ. Who of us is greatest? Okay, and of course, this is important for Luke to put this in because his gospel is to the Gentiles. Okay? You'll notice that that's not in here. That's not in the Mark gospel. And of course, that's not in Matthew. But it has to be in Luke because Luke's whole thing is about the reversal to the Gentiles. And specifically, he's thinking of Isaiah 52:15 when he says this. Because it's about the kings of the Gentiles. All right? And here we are now getting further detail in John, which is written after Mark. The fourth gospel is John's. See? This is, and all the scholars will tell you this, they all know this, the beloved disciple is John. Okay? So Simon Peter, see here's how the whole thing comes up. Simon Peter gestures to John and says, tell us who it is that he's talking about. Peter was obviously really, upset at this point. So then John, leaning back on Jesus' chest, because he's kind of reclining on his chest, who is it? And see, this is where, but this is the third instance. See? He who dipped his hand in the bowl with me. That means that he and Judas were putting their hand in the water bowl, their hand with the bit of food in the water bowl at the same time. Okay? And the one who is eating with me. Well, that's another instance or the same instance, because it's generic language in Mark. Okay? My hand is on the table with his. Well, that could be a third instance. You got that? And then the one who dips his hand in the bowl, for whom? He's going to dip bread and give it to him. See, these are all different times. These are all different. I don't want to put this. there are a lot of things going on at the table. You're putting your hand on the table, you're taking it off, you're getting salt, you're getting pepper, you're getting a piece of food, you're putting your hand down, you're putting your hand up. So this went on. This was a repeated instance of the same thing, where the actions of Judas were being predicted. Really, you got to understand the reason why he's doing this is so that Judas has enough chance to think it over and change his mind. All right? He's making it public. Judas is sitting right there, and he's still sitting there. And at one of these, it makes, given the wording, that this is one instance. This is another instance. Okay? This is a third instance. And this is the fourth one, the fourth related one. And it didn't necessarily happen in this order. I don't know what order they happened in. Okay? But they look like 4 different times at the same meal. Okay? Because here he's giving to Judas. Giving it to him. Okay? See, he gave it to him. And then he tells him, well, go ahead. Now, I don't know what the order is. I'm sure there might be a way to tell from the scripture, but I don't know what the order is. What I do know is that you're talking about probably 4 different kinds of things that happen at the table at the same time between him and Judas. Okay, so it's not a contradiction. It's a meal. Okay? So anyway, I'm going to close out that with it, and now we're going to get to a summary statement on why Mark is doing Mark 14. Okay, so why, closing it out, don't we see the word EUTHUS until Judas's kiss? First reason is you have to remember what EUTHUS means by itself. And it's really important to go over this because this shoots down the argument that some scholars have made that EUTHUS is just a common idiom of speech and doesn't have any doctrinal significance. That's a big lie. Lie is a strong word. That's totally incorrect. Because we have seen now, from Genesis forward, this is a very pregnant and important word, especially in the Psalms, especially in Isaiah. It is given a prophetic import and significance, but more importantly, a spiritual import and significance of removing obstacles, specifically so that you can draw near to God, so that the word EUTHUS and Angus are related. You can draw near to a destination if you don't have obstacles. If you got obstacles, you first have to stop. You suffer delays while you remove the obstacles before you can get nearer, engizo, before you can get nearer to the destination of being close to God. You got that? Being close and near to God, Angus, is a significant theological term in the Bible. Okay, the Hebrew used, but it's translated within the Greek, and we're looking at the New Testament now with Angus, and engizo is the verb. All right? Taku, which Mark doesn't use, talks about the swiftness of a surprise attack. Okay? And it's related to toxis, meaning that it's orderly. It's orderly and it's swift. The suddenness of the attack. All right? Next in sequence, all right, is also a meaning of EUTHUS. Taku tells you how fast it occurs, but not how much distance there is between event A, where you are now, and event B, the actual attack. Okay, unfortunately, it's mistranslated soon, as we've seen. So Taku relates to EUTHUS, in that EUTHUS is about the next thing that's going to happen. It's being obstruction free, and ideally it being the right, the straight thing. Straight is in right, but straight can be as in not right, going straight to hell. So straight is, we even use the same kind of idea in English. Okay, a thing that's straight is deemed to be upright and it's not crooked. It's not crooked, it's not leaning, it's not slanted. We've got all those ideas in English too, so we should be able to understand this. But straight can also be straight and bad. Straight to hell. Okay? Judas going straight to the chief priests and scribes, in other words. See? There he goes. In other words, what we find out from John is that this was the stumbling block for Judas. That was the end for him. Or we found that out from Luke, rather. He used that as his excuse to go and get paid for turning Christ in. Okay? And we see how Mark was quoting Luke there, using the word glad. Matthew didn't do that. Okay? So this was the turning point for Judas. But you'll notice Mark isn't using EUTHUS there, because there's nothing EUTHUS about this. This is nothing but obstacles. None of this had to happen the way it did. So EUTHUS is not appropriate. And you can't call it right. You have to call it crooked. You have to call it nothing but obstruction and obstacle. Okay? And you can't call it taku, because there's nothing swift about this either. It's one tangle after the next. Alright? So taku doesn't apply, that's why it's not used. Okay? EUTHUS doesn't apply because it's not immediate. It's got nothing but obstructions. It's not straight in any kind of way until Judas's kiss. And then, he goes straight to the Sanhedrin, and they go straight into more apostasy than ever. They're even, convening court on a Sabbath. Right? So there's nothing EUTHUS about this. So you see, you cannot, unless you're insane or unstudied, you cannot say that EUTHUS is just a common word, a common idiom, and it just means next in Mark's language of that day. That's a totally incompetent thing to say. Okay? Somebody who doesn't know Bible would talk like that. Someone who's dismissive of the Bible and doesn't believe it comes from God, or doesn't respect the Bible's use of words, would talk like that. We've really got to get rid of the bad scholars. If a brainout can see that simply by opening up BibleWorks and searching on the Word, which you're supposed to do, if it's that easy to see, then why aren't the scholars correcting what they did? And if they aren't correcting what they did, then let's encourage them to correct what they did. I don't want any scholar being ostracized or thrown out or laughed at. I'd like it very much if people would just admit, oh, you know what, we made this mistake, let's fix it now. You broke a window, so you fix it. You don't spend time saying how bad you are that you broke a window. Who cares? Christ paid for it. You got this great big credit card that says go to heaven free. All right, fine. Use the credit card. 1 John 1:9, use the credit card, and now fix it so that you can stop having this thing, in your past. Yeah, okay, it was in my past I did wrong. Do you know how many things I've done wrong in the past? If I dwell on all the things I did wrong, then I do more wrongs every day, worse than you'll ever know how to do. It's greater wrong to commit a sin against thinking against Scripture than it is to do any other kind of vice. And the more Scripture you know, the greater your sin is when you go against it. So, honey, my sins are far worse than yours. But I have to forget them. And Paul? What did Paul say in Philippians 3:14? Katas kopon dioko, ais tom brabeon, tesano klesius, tuteu in Christo Jesu. Okay, I have to keep going. I have to forget what's behind. The bigger your sins are, the more you got to forget them. You can't grow past your sins if you keep dwelling on them. Okay, fine. So these scholars committed, or you can say they committed sins, or you can say they didn't. Who cares? It's a mistake. It's wrong. Now you can fix it. And if the guy's dead already, do him a favor and fix it. Get rid of the obstruction and turn it into EUTHUS. Something that's straight. That way when you see the dead scholar and you get up to heaven, he'll be so happy. You'll both have a nice drink together. You'll laugh about it. Christ paid the bill. Spend his money. That's why I'm making these videos. I'm not doing it to be critical. When I go to heaven, I know I'm going to have my own mistakes to account for. And if I see somebody else's and I can sort of, get rid of it down here now, that's something I wish somebody would do for me. I'm not doing it to hurt somebody. I'm not doing it to say somebody's bad. If you see a mistake of mine, let's say I'm dead tomorrow. You see a mistake of mine and you fix it, when you get to heaven, I'm going to be out there handing my hand out and saying, "Hi, I owe you dinner. What would you like to eat? Thank you." Okay? Talking about correcting somebody in love doesn't mean just saying they're bad. Find the correction. Don't just say to somebody he's wrong. Tell them how to correct it. Then you really love the person. That's what you want done for you, right? Okay, so here, look. Everybody's making a mistake here. Everybody. All the disciples are making a mistake. See, look. See? Here's Peter making his big mistake. See, that's the theme of the passage. It's not to badmouth Judas. Here's Judas's mistake. Okay, but here's Peter's. They all fell asleep. See? Acts is the book of the bad hair day. The stupid acts of the apostles is how it ought to be translated. Okay, and everybody, look. Everybody falls asleep. Okay? And then he gets arrested and everybody leaves him. Not just Peter, not just Judas. Everybody betrayed him. And this young man here, okay, some have speculated that it's Mark, and maybe it was, but I think there's a passage in John saying that it was John. But I'll have to check that. Maybe I made a mistake. See? So everybody left him. Everybody. You could argue that Peter was actually a little more loyal because he came back. You see? The message in here, until you get to verse 43, is obstacle. There's no EUTHUS going on here. So you cannot say that EUTHUS means just a plain old average idiom for next. No. It's a rhetorical device that has been omitted on purpose by Mark to make a point about nothing being straight during Passover dinner. And then as illustrated also in the previous 3 chapters, 13, 12, and 11. If you want to argue with that, feel free. I would really like to hear some good argument that tries to account for the excessive use of EUTHUS. Try away. Signing off.